You're listening to Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong, all on Georgia Radio Network.
Welcome to a very special episode 111 of the Let Me Tell You Why You're Wrong podcast. I'm Dave Roberts. With me, as always, my partner in crime, writer, blogger.
Are you sure about that?
Connie's partner in crime.
That's right. That's right.
Jessica Salachi.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How's your quarantine?
I mean, I haven't lost what was left of my mind yet, so that's good.
And we were just commiserating on before we started recording that we both got our hair done as soon as we saw this coming down. And I know it's vain for a man to say, but you know, I have like naturally like white trash hair, so if I don't keep it short, it curls. It like self mullets.
Like Tiger King or what?
Yeah, like Joe Dirt.
Well, I just don't want to have Rona roots.
Oh man, I mean, you might have to reduce to buying some color.
No. I have gone this long in my life. I won't give in now.
Well, we're gonna get into the main show. We've got a guest coming on, and so finally we're gonna get some disagreement, I think.
You think?
Well, here we go. Let's introduce our guest. Join us now is James Woodall, president of the Georgia NAACP. James has joined the show before, but it was before Dave.
No, you were absent. It was during your tenure.
Oh, was it?
Yes.
I didn't listen to the own show. It must be when I was in the hospital. I didn't listen.
Yes, thanks. You're great. So proud to have you as my show partner. Sorry, James.
I don't subscribe to your newsletter.
Yeah. Don't support your own causes, but I'm supportive and I'm excited that James is here for a second time. Thank you, James.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm excited about this conversation we're about to discuss today.
So well, actually, before we get started, since Dave didn't listen to the last show, can you give us a little background on your activism background and your political leanings and kind of what you've run for office before? Just give us a little James bio.
Most definitely. So I started really my career in public policy and civil rights around 2014 there in Statesboro, Georgia, when I was a college junior, I believe. And we were doing a lot of marches, around Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner and those kinds of instances of, police brutality. And then we had a instance where there was a petition that was started by me to remove the Confederate monument from the Bullock County Courthouse Square, or Courthouse Lawn, rather. And, that really just got me fired up and ready to go. I joined the NAACP in 2014 and, started rising through the ranks there. And I ran for state representative in 2016 for District 160, which I like to always say I even made a libertarian
sure
vote
did.
for me. So
put a big old 4x4 in my yard.
So, my leanings are not very consistent with your stereotypical Democrat, if you will. I'm very principled and I'm very consistent in that principle. My priority and my permanent interest is the liberation of all people. It's not Democrat, it's not Republican. I have no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. Only permanent interest, and that is the liberation of all people. So when it comes to these issues, I often take very interesting approaches to how I engage on the questions of civil rights and justice and those kinds of things. Many people might agree, many people might disagree. It just depends on the day of the week. And so now I'm working as the state president for the Georgia NAACP, really giving the state organization a more youthful approach to how we engage civil rights questions, as well as really bringing new voices to the table. So it's been an exciting journey these past 6 months, but the best is yet to come.
So as a rising star, I'm going to see you with SE Cup on CNN as the national rep. Soon I'll see you on CNN with SE Cup doing an interview as a talking head. Be too big for us.
No, I'm always make time with a little bit.
Oh gosh. Well, I'm excited you're here. And when I asked you, I was like, it's kind of late notice, but there's not a whole lot going on in terms of, like, no one's going anywhere. So people, when we ask them to come on the podcast, they're like, yeah, sure, I'm free. It's funny right now. But, you have a much different perspective on, well, sometimes different perspective on government than we do. So, what lens are you looking through this pandemic through? And, how are you approaching it?
There's a multifaceted approach. One, I'm looking at what is possible, what is feasible as far as our state government is concerned. I also think that a lot of people have been really not aware of what the federalist kind of system, how that plays into our COVID-19 response. And seeing the federal government work its wheels, if you will, and then the state government kind of waiting and playing a game of cat and mouse, it's really been an interesting lesson for civics, right? It's for people who really aren't as aware of how civics play into their daily lives. And so I've approached it from the more educational aspect, but I've also approached it from how can we minimize the damages of this disease, whether it's economic damage, whether it's even the spiritual damage has been a part of it, and the institutional damage. And the institutional damage, I'm not really as concerned with that because, on one hand, I kind of want certain systems to fail because I don't think that they are a benefit to our communities at all anyway. And so, but the last part of it was, how do we create sufficient and sustainable programming that not only is a benefit to communities across the state of Georgia, but also that wouldn't be a burden, if you will, to our fiscal status. And so it's been a very intricate balance, having to really juggle those three motivations, if you will. But I think, once we get past these days, it's going to really show who is leaders, because I've seen a lot of criticism of various leaders, whether it's Brian Kemp, Donald Trump, and those kinds of people, in many cases rightly so. But the people are looking, especially during the election year, people are looking for leaders that are willing to stand and not only give information and be a source of wisdom and inspiration, but also to provide some resolution to their ills and to their challenges. That is ultimately what people in this moment are looking for, not just people who go into social media and just say, you should do this, you should do that. And, but really, find creative ways and solutions to solve the challenges that people are facing in the right now.
So before we go any further, what systems do you want to fail? Because that's, let's just get them right out of the gate.
Capitalism.
All right.
Most definitely capitalism.
Tell me why. And so I can tell you why you're wrong, but go ahead.
Well, primary reason is we see on the national level, we see states having to compete with one another. And granted, this is also to do with the federal response to this crisis. But you see states having to compete for a limited number of supply, whether it was PPE or whether it was, thermometers, right? And those various things. I believe that people should not have to compete with one another to exist and to live and to thrive healthily, especially during a crisis when you see an increase in, demand for product because people are literally dying, and people die every day. And so this is not a new thing for me. I know you've seen me, share my thoughts on a lot of various challenges that especially Black people face, and money and wealth and finance should not be a barrier to those systems that really provide, ample opportunity for success for successful living. And so if you have a structure that historically has been a disproportionate impact or a negative impact to the Black community, why would we lift it up? I mean, we've seen examples of even Black capitalism where you have a conglomerate of Black entrepreneurs and Black business owners and those kinds of things censor themselves within communities within the state of Georgia as well as around the nation. Either they fell victim to the white empire structure, or you've seen it crumble from the inside out. So I can go way much more deeper if you want me to, using international examples, if you want me to, but I'll elect not to do so voluntarily.
Well, I mean, we can come back to it because there's a lot more to talk about, but I guess what I'm asking is, so you're looking at this as an opportunity because everything is so disrupted right now. You're looking at it as an opportunity where we could replace our practices with something else.
Well, I don't think, and this goes to the fundamental question of will coronavirus solve the challenges of white supremacy in 2020? I don't believe it will, because what we've seen is, for instance, these stay-at-home orders, right? And we're telling people stay home, right? But they still have bills to pay. They still have to meet mortgages. They still have to put food on the table. And so having people choose between what is the public good and the common good and to protect themselves and their welfare and their livelihood, that's literally at the heart of capitalism. Do you put your own interests to the side to benefit the greater good? At the end of the day, every single time, capitalism is going to answer, no, we don't do that. We put our individual interests at the forefront. We prioritize that over the communal good. And so I'm of the belief that you have to put the communal good to make sure that everybody's okay. But the question is how to do that. Now, socialism is not necessarily the answer, but I believe that there are some tenets in it that we could adopt. I mean, we already have socialism here in this country. It's just not for everybody. It's only for those who have the financial flexibility to make it happen.
Lord.
So you graduate from capitalism to get to socialism, which is an interesting concept.
Yeah. Yeah, no. My wife is in banking and I own a company. No. And I tell you, everybody says stay home until the AC breaks. And then they're like, please, Dave, come break my quarantine. Which, I mean, you're going to have, our houses aren't built the way they were in the 1800s to open windows and have air flow through. So people die when it gets to be 100 degrees inside the house. Not that I'm comparing myself to like I'm some savior, but I certainly don't mind benefiting financially from providing a service. And when I look at any government system that says, well, we're gonna handle all the supplies. Well, I mean, I remember Soviet Russia. That's my era when I grew up is around Perestroika and Glasnost and the handoff to Gorbachev and around that time, and I was lucky enough to interact with some of the Russian exchange students. Actually, dated a couple of them, and to ask them, what kind of what they found here. Like, you have so much is available to you. The nationalizing a medical system doesn't produce more. It tends to lead to rationing. And even in socialist countries, it's truly not equal. You always have the haves. And the Soviet Union, it was the party members. The party members had separate grocery stores, if you rose within the party. They had separate access. They had privilege, and the working class was left in bread lines. And of course, we see the Chi-Com's version of what they do is lock everybody down and then lie and produce propaganda about what's going on there, and we know that's what's going. We know that they've been doing that for years. And I know your background's is in intel. My background's in psychological operations. So I mean, we know that the Chinese have been producing propaganda on their stuff for years as far as how well their system's working.
But both of those examples, which is an interesting observation, both of those examples present to us communism, which is not socialism. And, you know, we can even look at examples of socialism, and they are imperfect as well. But I guess where I'm going is that there is no perfect system. However, it does take, and I know this sounds otherworldly, but it does take an imaginative effort to really construct a way of life that not only incentivizes people to benefit financially, but also takes care of those who are less than and less fortunate. I believe that fundamentally we cannot just simply destroy people's livelihoods, nor can we just throw away people simply because we don't agree with them or we don't like them. And so we have scores of classes of people within this country. We have scores of communities within this country that if they do not, benefit the greater good financially, then they're less than, right? And we've seen that time and time again through public policy, we've seen that through activism, we've seen that through experiences of brutality and violence and really warfare as well. And so how do you create a society that is genuinely concerned about every single person and not willing to just put a number on paper and say, this is you, and we do nothing for you for the rest of your life? You cannot say, and I'm not saying necessarily you guys, but you cannot say you are pro-life, but you disregard every life that's unlike yours, right? But you also can't say you're pro-choice and you just simply demonize everybody else who says they're pro-life. There is a duality that's often presented that is really false of reality. And so my main thing is, how do we create community, the true community across the state as well as across this country that represents all colors, all shades, all lifestyles, all people, so that everybody can live and everybody can rise? I believe that it's possible. And if it wasn't possible, I wouldn't be able to live myself, because that's what keeps me going. It keeps the people going.
All right. Well, let's talk specifically about Georgia, because, I mean, ideologically, we could go. We probably should have you back for, when we run out of things to talk about the virus. But taking all of that into consideration, what do you think about the state's response, and specifically about the shelter-in-place executive order signed by Governor Kemp on Thursday?
So I think it was time for a stay-at-home order. I think when we look at the statewide response as opposed to local municipalities, a lot of requests were made that, people saying, well, hey, Governor, you got to do this. You got to do this because people are dying. Well, the reality was I was only in opposition to a state order because, again, if you can't tell people how they're going to manage while at home, if you're not going to provide them with the critical necessities and the bare minimums for them to live while they're at home, then you can't tell them to just stay at home. And if they don't choose to stay at home, you can't throw them in jail. Granted, I get that, people are saying, well, they're not staying at home and they need to be in these orders need to be enforced for the public good. I said, you can encourage people to do anything while simultaneously not throwing them in jail because they don't do it. You cannot make people do anything. That is what makes this country what it is. There is no government mandate, regardless if it's an emergency or not, that's going to tell people that you have to do this. Even this criminal justice system. If we were all, and I'm not suggesting we do this, but if we were all to just congregate and say we would not honor any court's order because we don't believe the court has justification, nor does it have any power. It really doesn't. We consent to it. So if we all just came together and said, we're not going to listen to y'all, they don't have any power. But I say all that to say, the order that he did issue, I've kind of looked through it, and there's really nothing troublesome outside of the quote unquote essential business or the essential activity. I always struggle with what makes a operation essential, especially when those who are quote unquote essential aren't necessarily getting compensated as such, right? You still see them trying to make ends meet themselves, and so if they are essential, they should be paid as such. But that's really it. I'm very frustrated at various localities like Fulton County, of which I live now, saying that they're going to throw people in jail and fine them $1,000. We see research that suggests, threat or not, fines and jailing people to not do certain things do not deter behavior. They just don't. And I wish, people would stop saying that it does, because the data just doesn't suggest that at all. But some people don't really follow data and research. They just go off of he say, she say. So,
well, and
that's
the opposite side of that is, I know the sheriff of Cherokee County dropped a statement, and I believe our sheriff here in Paulding County is of the same vein. Is they're not out there enforcing that. They don't want to boogaloo either. That's not what they're doing. This is probably the best policing that you will ever see in your life, because they don't want to. I mean, if they stop you for speeding, they're staying 10 feet away from you, going, slow down, now get out of here. The police officers don't want it either.
I do agree with that. Sorry, not to interrupt, but I do want to chime in on that, just because there have been a number of police departments around the state who have internally ordered, not to conduct even traffic stops. That's happened, which is less police community interaction. And then there's sheriff's offices who have said, only bring in felonies or DUIs.
The number one thing I hear that they're actually taking people in for is domestic violence, and that's a crime with a victim. Yeah, so absolutely. But to quote a friend of mine, the dope man can wait till August.
Well,
and so that raises a very fundamental question: what point is writing laws of the people who are going to enforce it are not going to enforce it?
Not only that, but
you see what I'm saying?
It's just like the government regulation side of things, where we've lifted all these restrictions for truckers. The FDA has suspended rules for vaccine trials and things like that, and the PPE manufacturing with 3D printing and hand sanitizers at breweries, all these things. You're telling me that right now in this emergency that all of these things can operate with fewer government restrictions, but in a normal circumstance they can't because it's a threat to the public, but when the world is literally on fire, the entire globe is on fire, it's okay?
Well, look, that's what we found out with the bridge collapse on 85. We got, once they lifted all the regulations, that bridge went up in a hurry.
Well, sure, they offered them millions of dollars they set a deadline, said if you beat this deadline, they set a deadline they knew they could meet, and gave them millions of dollars for meeting that deadline. I'd have my people working all night too.
And they rolled that down to the workers and the supervisors. Hey, if you hit your individual deadline, here's a bonus.
Right.
So we used money as a motivator, even in a government project, to get it up fast.
Right. And so the other thing is, kind of go back to the original question you asked about, systems, but there was a report this morning that there's this clash between the federal stockpile and what states are using to really fight this thing. And Jared Kushner goes, well, the federal stockpile isn't the state stockpile, and people were really upset about that. So I just find that interesting how inconsistent the response has been when it comes to fundamental principle of these are the necessary actions to be taken during a crisis. And I don't know if we've ever seen, we have seen things like this, but not in our lifetime at least. Not even 9/11 kind of presented with us the level of inconsistency and incongruency that we have here. And so going forward, I believe leaders need to really develop a very streamlined response plan to crisis and pandemic, because if not, then what you're going to see is what we got right now, which is a hot mess.
So do you think that the state government should still do more?
No, not really. I think this is the moment that communities should be community. I really genuinely believe that, and it's very interesting that you raised that question, because me being a progressive, I'm always advocating for a stronger safety net. But I think we also need communities to step up and really lead in this moment, because we know that the government, and I think in many ways it was destined to have very weak leadership at the state and in the national level, to really present there to be a vacuum of opportunity, that leaders within communities across the state stand up and actually organize their people so that everybody can be taken care of, because ultimately that's what a government should be doing. But unfortunately, I've seen for far too long where that just simply doesn't happen. And so I've lost faith in having government actually work for the people. And so the people must work for the people, which is the most important part of democracy as a whole. It's the people, not the government. And so, can they do more? Yes, raise more revenue. But I have little hope that that'll be an actual possibility, seeing as we were just ready and prepared to cut taxes for a second time within the last 24 months here in the state. We ranked 43 out of 50 when it comes to tax revenue, or tax collection revenue out of 50 states. And so it's like, well, what else do you expect? We got the federally expanded benefits for gig economy workers and independent contractors. The state's commissioner for labor, Mark Butler, says, well, we don't have the capacity to handle it. I'm like, well, you at least have the money. He said, well, no, we don't have the money either. And so it's like you have all these people getting promises of coverage and economic relief, when the reality is the institution itself is not prepared for the increase in demand, nor do they have the infrastructure to handle such. So, I really have zero hope. And if they do perform,
not to be fatalistic,
if they do perform, then great. But ultimately, it's going to be those within our communities that actually, really make this thing.
Well, that is the libertarian argument, which is, if you weren't stealing out of my check, I could be a lot more philanthropic with it. I'm much more likely to help the old lady down the road when I don't have to write a 5-figure check to the federal government in April, which thankfully is now in July. But it's a lot easier to do, to be philanthropic with it. It's a lot easier to feed the economy when I'm not paying it out in tax. So with that, it truly is up to individuals. If you have an elderly couple next door, how about a phone call? Would you like us to go? I'm going to Publix. What do you need? Let me save your exposure. Doing the things like, I was at the store and I know you said you're out of toilet paper. I went ahead and grabbed a pack. I'll leave it on your doorstep, so you don't have to go out. So only one of us in this cul-de-sac is exposed. And I know that's very suburbanite of me to say in the cul-de-sac.
Yeah, I was like, my neighbors, I'll be walking for a little while to get to my neighbors. But
they don't like you anyway.
Yes, they do. They just didn't like how long I left James' sign up. They were just mad about that. What do you think about the fact, because obviously I've been ripping into local governments on the show and on Facebook and in articles for what they've tried to do, because I felt like they were going well beyond not just what was constitutionally allowed, but like beyond their knowledge base. I mean, sure, City of Atlanta has resources that the City of Statesboro or the City of Claxton doesn't have, just because of numbers and hospitals and all these things. But what do you think about the fact that Kemp's order basically nullified every local ordinance that's been enacted since March 1?
Well, that goes back to the federalism question, and I'll probably need more examples as to what specific ordinances were nullified. I mean, which
every order. So the way that the language in his order was written at the end was that any ordinance that at a local or county level that in any way differed or conflicted or varied from his ordinance or his executive order, excuse me, was here that had been passed as a result of the response to COVID-19 since March 1, 2020, was effectively suspended and rescinded, and that no city or county could enact another ordinance while his executive order was in place. So Athens, City of Atlanta, everyone's still under a local emergency declaration if they declared one, but any ordinance they passed is nullified because nobody had the language that Kemp had. So if you had essential businesses listed and you shuttered just a certain number of them, your ordinance varied, so it's null. If you had, like in Evans County, where they wanted to take away people's Fourth Amendment right and allow people to come on their property and inspect it without a warrant, that's null. So he did it on purpose because his chief of staff was on social media last weekend talking about how some local governments had gone too far. And they had. I mean, we saw what happened in the city of Cumming with them saying that if two people who weren't married or related by blood were together, they could go to jail by a special police force. Like, what? I mean, they were truly out of control. So it was intentional what he did, but of course all the local governments are shrieking, well, what about local control? What about local control? And his argument was, well, we needed uniformity on this response.
And that was what Governor Kemp's office was hearing from both sides of the aisle. I hate that this has turned into partisan back and forth, but it has, and it's really frustrating. But you saw both. It was a bipartisan response that says the state needs to do something because the incongruency of response was literally killing people. Right? It literally was, and so. Initially it was, well, we really don't want to do a statewide because everybody hasn't been exposed. There isn't cases everywhere of which everybody needs to just shelter down. But people also have to remember, we've already been in this thing at least 14 days, right? And they said that the symptomatic period is about 10 to 14 days. So that the fact that we're going longer than that shows us that something wasn't working. And we're already going to go to a recession, one, nationally and statewide. And there has to be something done that really mitigates any damage. So the congruency part of it is sufficient in my eyes. However, at the same time, I do see, again, the inconsistency of lots of people. It's like you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. At the end of the day, your job is to save lives. And so I think, that'll ultimately be what happens. We're going to see a peak here soon on what, people are telling us around mid-April, mid to late April, early May. But again, it still goes back to the question is, most people, and I genuinely believe this, I'm not a medical or public health professional, but I believe most people already probably have this. They're just asymptomatic. They're just simply carriers. But it's really about protecting, in the words of Governor Cuomo of New York, it's really protecting those who are just medically fragile and most vulnerable, right? That 1%, those 2% of people who can't necessarily just simply shrug this off, who have respiratory illnesses and disease, who have, other conditions that make it a little bit difficult for them. And it changes you when you see people you know and love either get this or pass away from it. And so we have to definitely encourage people, to stay home, minimize direct, activity or being in the vicinity of others, for the time being, just for the sake of, people we would come in contact with. So it's not a clear answer as to is this the right or wrong thing to do. I think it's the most pressing and urgent thing to do while still being a conduit of good government. But that's the good government part is really hard for me to say.
I mostly agree with you. I mostly agree with what you're saying. I just would disagree on the part that government's job is to save lives, because I don't need saving right now. I just need someone to stop limiting my liberties as a healthy person who has not broken any laws. Like, that's how I'm looking at it. I know we're looking at it through two different lenses, and understandably so, from circumstances, from ideology, I live in the middle of the country. I have a totally different situation. And I understand that. I don't believe government's job is to save. I don't believe government is capable of saving lives, I guess, is my issue. So stop trying to, because every time you do, you just limit my freedoms and mess things up. Like, get the bull out of the china closet.
Yeah, well, I don't know if the government's job is to save lives either. However, I think it's our communal response's job to save lives. And ultimately, people's argument have been, we need something or somebody to do something so that we can ensure that the community can save each other's lives. And I don't necessarily agree with that position, because I've gotten a lot of feedback and a lot of pushback from my disagreeing with, the local ordinances that lock people up. I'm like, no, all we can do is really encourage people, to do the right thing. And if they don't do it, that's on them, which is an unfortunate thing. But the reality of it is the government really can't tell you or make you do anything. Like, that's like saying, this is so unrelated, but this is like saying, we're going to stop abortions because it's not right. Abortions still happen every single day.
On that, there's no carve out to violate the Constitution for a public health crisis. There are specific examples: rebellion and invasion, and that's it. Those are the carve outs to start suspending rights. So there is no specific carve out. I heard the argument on Facebook the other day that this is an invasion. It's an invasion by a virus. No. And to your other point about the community, and you and I have a similar background in that we're both in the Army. Is when you serve, there's no great plan in the soldier's mind. He's serving with the man next to him, and
Yep. What? Or the woman.
Back when I was doing, we didn't have any women, any females on the teams. I'm old.
Oh, I got you.
But you're serving with the soldier next. Yeah.
Sound like pre-World War II.
Well. But you're serving for your team. You're serving for your guys. It's not some great plan that the president lays out that you're like, okay, let's go execute that. Is you're worried about the person next to you. That's the same thing in the community. Is we need to be worried about the people next to me, not what Cuomo's saying in New York. And God, I can't listen to one more press conference with him. I'm not saying he's saying anything wrong. It's just he and Trump have the same speech pattern of rambling. And if I hear him say respirator one more time, I think I'm going to rip out his nipple rings.
Lord have mercy. I don't think I've watched one press conference. I've watched one of Cuomo's, but I did not watch a single.
It's every day too.
I mean, I think if you turn on I saw something on social media that says they don't even tell you the weather anymore. They just wake up, coronavirus. Right. More people.
Yeah, and that is why Netflix is making so much money in the stupid Tiger show. Because you turn on the TV, it's like I'd rather watch Tiger King than one more. Yeah, I mean, I get it. Coronavirus is still out there. Let me watch this guy get bit by a tiger.
Well, and from the community's perspective, I mean, and I've said this for a while now because I don't know the exact date of how many days we're in this, but the legislature adjourned at least 3 weeks ago. So we are for all intents and purposes 3 weeks in the state of Georgia of understanding that social distancing needs to be a thing. And from a community perspective, I've been doing my part, and my neighbors have been doing their part, and most people I know have been doing their part. And so tell me if you agree with this statement or not, because you said you think that everyone, like most people or a lot of people more than we know, have this already, which I do agree with. I agree there are lots of asymptomatic people out there, and I think there are lots of people who will have it, never know they have it, and move on with their lives, or people who will never get tested or never get treatment, and they'll move on with their lives as well. But I think we're at the breaking point right now where the people who are going to stay home willingly have been. The people who can stay home when they're not doing first responder things or medical staffing things are, and the people who aren't going to heed anyone's advice or orders are going to continue on as they see fit. And at some point, we just have to put our hands up and say, okay, like, that's on them. You know, people, and I've gotten blowback for saying this, but people are going to die. Like, if it's a deadly virus, there's nothing you can do to completely prevent every single person from dying. So if everyone is doing the best that they can, and the renegades are out there doing whatever they would like to do regardless, at some point we just have to let them and understand that if they do die, they die.
Well, and that's the thing with tracking this one by one, is one death is a tragedy. 1 million is a statistic. Can't talk today. Statistic. And yes, we're recording early in the morning before I'm drinking. I just can't talk.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that, though?
Yeah, as you're tracking individual deaths, and every death is a tragedy. But when you look at mass numbers, and I can't remember who came up with that quote. It may have been Mao. But when you start looking at large numbers, Foxworthy once said, like, you hear about a bus wreck in India and like 85 people died. And you're like, how'd they get 85 people on a bus? You no longer look at the tragedy itself as much as you look at the number. And we're tracking individual cases, and that's, I hate to say insignificant. It's significant to everybody, but the fact that we know this county has 3 confirmed cases, this county has 7 confirmed cases, is that we're getting really, really myopic and lost in the weeds rather than looking at the overall picture. How many people recovered? How many people can go back into the workforce?
I do agree with that, because one of the questions I've had all along with this hospitalization thing is, well, how many people do we hospitalize in the state on a normal day? We don't even know. No one's told us that. Like, yeah, it sounds bad that we've got 1,500 people in the hospital right now for this. That's a lot of people. But how many people do we in a flu season, and how many on a day-to-day basis? How many people are our medical professionals treating? We don't have any perspective,
right,
or relativity.
There's no nuance. There's no nuance, because another thing that we have to keep in mind is that people who were scheduled for various procedures and elective surgeries and treatment of other diseases and things of that nature, for the most part, have been put on pause. And so that's scary enough to me, in and of itself. But this is where we are, and so I'm not as far as saying, they're gonna die.
Well, they can.
Well, I'm not saying that, like, just blow it off as that. I'm just saying at some point, like, people do have to recognize that we cannot prevent every death. And there's people who are unwilling to concede that. They're like, no, you have to do more, you have to do more, you have to do more. And at some point, the government can no longer do more. I mean, you said yourself that we can't deter people from doing something. If one healthy person wants to go hang out with somebody who's coughing and, can't smell anything, well, do you want to put them both in jail and expose everybody, or do you just let the 2 of them do whatever they're going to do and deal with it?
Oh yeah, I'm there with you on that. I think the jails are the most vulnerable population of catching this disease, and that's why we've advocated at the NAACP to release most of the nonviolent offenders, especially those who are pre-trial, as well as those who are prepared to go on parole or at the end of their sentence. Go ahead and parole them, let them out, go home, because the more people we have in these jails, the worse the problem begins. It's a very concentrated population. Majority of people who are serving in prison as is aren't violent offenders. They committed petty crimes like possession of marijuana. That isn't a crime that should be enforceable by prison. But that's another.
Now, you won't get any pushback here.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make any sense. And so generally speaking, I love that several sheriff departments. I know Ted Jackson here in Fulton has done it. He's released dozens of inmates. The Department of Paroles has gone ahead and paroled 200 or so inmates or prisoners who were at the end of their sentence. They were nonviolent offenders, and he said, "Well, let's go ahead and parole them." And so those are small wins I believe, for not only democracy but our communities as well. Um, but we should see more of those kinds of actions. I saw a court system. I can't remember where, but they were delaying court payments, right? Saying, "Hey, we understand people are without work. Instead of you having to still pay your court fines or restitution or those kinds of things, we're going to delay them for 30 to 60 days. Not necessarily erasing them, but they're saying we understand what's happening right now. This is unprecedented time." The other thing I would say that I'm concerned about is the battle between tenants and property owners. That's been a very hodgepodge of mess, and the federal response has made it a little bit more difficult, and banks aren't being as flexible. So, all in all, to say this is something that's very unprecedented, and we're seeing the true like integrity and character of institutions as well as people within our community. So I'm taking notes. I'll just say,
well,
I'm taking many notes or mental notes rather, on what we're seeing and how people are responding and reacting. Because you're seeing people.
Well, the landlord thing, it's a ripple. If you don't pay your rent, the landlord can't pay his mortgage, and then the bank can't collect from him. And then ultimately the shareholders, and I know everybody's, also, when I took English, him, when you talk about general public, covered him and her.
I gotcha.
That's true. People say, well, screw the banks. Well, most people look in their 401ks and their IRAs and they look at their mutual funds, they own bank stock. They are shareholders in banks. So that ripple effect comes down to right back down to that individual who goes and looks at his 401k and goes, man, I'm losing my ass and I want to retire in 3 years. So when that cash flow stops, and this goes back to stopping the economy, and you can't pay the landlord can't pay the mortgage, and the banks can't collect that money, and then obviously their profitability goes down, which causes their stock price to go down and ultimately hurts individual shareholders.
And the other thing is, people were talking about the forbearance part of the forbearance provision of the CARES Act, and what you see is that you can go into forbearance for 3 to 6 months, but the challenge is once your forbearance is over, then you have to pay all those at the same time plus the next month, and so no one has. If you aren't collecting during that time period, nobody has. Or some do, but I know a lot of landlords wouldn't have the ability to make that aggregate payment all at once. That's the part, of on part of the tenant to provide that income so that they can pay it, it's just a different space to be in right now, to really be able to evaluate the efficiency of systems. I mean, because it's just not efficient at all.
Well, and even then, the average American could not absorb a $400 unforeseen expense.
And why is that?
Saving is decentivized.
Or is it because they just don't simply make enough wages to save?
The stuff I see now when you travel around the world, you see people living smaller houses, and this isn't all the way, an old tube TV, things like that. And what booms our economy is we spend a lot, and there's not a whole lot of saving. The salesman mentality. Okay, we're gonna sell you a car. Well, how much can you afford per month? Not how much can you afford for the car. Oh, well, let me see. Well, if we push this out to 10 years, and some car loans go 10 years, you could afford the payment. It is that sort of mentality that our society has, rather than saying, well, how much money can I afford to spend on a car?
It's called the psychology of capitalism. I mean, the entire economy has been built on a psychological construct that really puts us in position to make those purchases. I mean, you even look at the colors of various fast food restaurants. They are that color for a psychological reason. And so the response to those constructs prevent people from truly being able to do what the capitalist mindset says not to do. So it's like a catch-22, right? You want people, and it goes back to my deconstruction of capitalism as a whole. You want people to save, you want them to not spend the money that they do earn, but then you say, well, this is what makes the economy grow. This is what makes it go. This is what makes it thrive. It's by people spending, the consumer habits. That's the very index of consumer happiness is based on the ability for consumers to be able to spend more money. And if they don't spend more money, we then use indexes that really say, well, consumers are not happy, so let's do something about it. And they put more stimulus in their pocket so that they can spend more money. But it's like, at the same time, you say, well, we want them to save it. It's like a catch-22. It's like, do you want them to save money and not, have as many expenditures, on miscellaneous items, or do you want them to simply just put it all into a bank? The bank institution and the financial institution, that's a whole nother conversation. But at the heart of it is, what as a community do we want? Do we want consumer happiness and consumer activity and economic boost? Or do we just simply want everybody to be able to take care of their basic essential needs and put the rest of it away into a 401k or a savings account, those kinds of things? I mean, it's not a one-way street, but at the same time, we have to be, consistent in our argument of how do we build the most.
Well, I'm a capitalist pig. In fact, one of my favorite blogs is Capitalist Pig by Jonathan Honan. But we save. I mean, I know it's we spend what we need to, but we buy what we can afford. We bought a small house we can afford. I didn't get the super awesome trucks that everybody wants, but I got one that's nice enough and I can afford. We don't buy new vehicles every few years, but still, I mean, there's a personal responsibility there that I take. If something happens to the house, which I was very close to a tree wrecking it, we have savings to take care of it.
Can we go back for a second to the colors about fast food restaurants and capitalism? I'm sorry, I can't move on until we address that. Can you give me like an elevator speech of that?
Yeah, you drive by McDonald's. The sign, what color of the sign of
Yellow.
McDonald's is what? Okay, and what does yellow mean on the traffic light?
I thought I meant
Then
communism,
slow down.
but go ahead. Go ahead.
What? Oh wow, Bullitt County Jail inmate dies. Okay. Anyways, that just popped on my.
Well, if you would have had that news before, had you been keeping up with allongeorgia.com, just so you know, we had that story yesterday. But anyway.
I have you guys on notification. No, I don't. I'm following you, but I don't have. I don't know. I'll have to look at it. Anyways, but so yellow and red. Oftentimes, you don't see a restaurant other than black or like a fast food restaurant. You don't really see any other colors other than those two things. And this is just a small, minuscule example of the psychological effect of capitalism. That there are marketing tools and strategies that really motivate the consumer to participate in that economy or that economic activity. And so slow down, or the arch is yellow, but it's really red because you see the actual McDonald's house, around the McDonald's house, the top of it is red. And so you see the sign, which is yellow, but you have the red letters, which means slow down or stop on the traffic light. And so those is just a small example of the social program of capitalism that really feeds into the psychology of
assuming that you're right.
consumers.
I mean, that's better than state-run propaganda. But the yellow and red,
of course,
they're there to be seen. And those colors came out,
of course,
when much of TV advertising was still in black and white. So, just like if you look at how they used to dress in black and white movies with westerns, they'd wear these wild, bright colors that you never would have been seen, but it picked up in a black and white camera. So those colors really go back to how can we get it seen. It's not pushing capitalism. It is getting attention, and what they want is, from a distance, the kid in the back seat to see those arches and go, "I want a Happy Meal."
Exactly, which is a direct response to capitalist venture. I mean, it's not. I'm not saying it's wrong what I'm saying is it emits a psychological response that says, hey, I want McDonald's. Why? Because in your mind, you say McDonald's equals Happy Meal. Happy Meal equals me being satisfied. Regardless of if it's an actual good product or if it's healthy or if it actually benefits the well-being of that child, right? But the child sees it, tells mom or dad, I want McDonald's. McDonald's makes money. They're happy. The children is fed. It's a win-win, right? But over time, you see what the impact of that does to the body. You see, and so it's more so comprehensive evaluation of not just the marketing strategy, but what does that marketing strategy actually lead to, right? And that is literally capitalism 101, that they are using marketing and advertisement to encourage participation and buy-in and activity so that the business wins financially, the consumer is satisfied, and that's how we evaluate consumer happiness.
Well, and the business continues to employ people. And
right. So I'm not necessarily saying that model is demonic, but what I'm saying is one is efficient. However, I want to make it where it benefits every person and not just simply the corporation. The corporation should be able to provide a product that's not killing people, right? I'm not saying McDonald's is killing people, but I'm just using that as an example. But McDonald's is pretty trash.
Yeah, there's nothing better with a hangover than a Big Mac.
Actually, no. It's called Waffle House.
Well, Waffle House is what you're supposed to have as the night is ending to prevent the hangover in the morning.
Yeah.
True. And if you have a hangover, just ginger ale. That's what my grandma
Bloody
said.
Mary.
Oh, geez. Just get started again. That's terrible.
Get back on the horse.
That's the best way to get over it.
Just push it back. Actually, an IV bag works really, really well.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
Like, we just had
Not right now. Gosh, you'll go to jail for that, for hoarding medical supplies. Well, that's a great way to wrap up because we could probably go on for hours and hours, but
no one would listen.
Especially you, because you don't even listen to your own show sometimes. But I always appreciate when you come on or argue with me on social media or whatever it may be, because you're respectful and you're a good sport, and you can articulate your opinions well, even if I don't agree. So I do appreciate that. Can you tell people where they can follow you or learn more about you or connect with you?
Yeah, so you all can always go to our website at NAACP, so NAACPGA.org. You can follow us on social media. Our official accounts are Georgia spelled out _NAACP, or you can follow me on my personal at IMajorWish. IMAJORWISH. Thank y'all so much for having me, and I'm excited to listen back to this conversation and see what conversation is a direct response to.
Thanks for coming on.
All things considered, I think that was a pretty good interview if I have to criticize ourselves. But I want to remind everybody, these have been our opinions and the individual opinions of our guest, and not necessarily those of All on Georgia, and certainly not those of any All on Georgia reporter not offering commentary on this particular show. Jessica, your closing thoughts?
The only closing thought I have is some wonderful news. Last week, a Fulton County judge issued an 11-page order striking down 2016's stripper tax, which was pushed in the Senate by Senator Renee Unterman and in the House by Chuck F. Strachan, both of Gwinnett County, both enemies of this show. But anyway, at the time in 2016, we passed a measure, a new tax on strip club and adult entertainment industries or businesses that required them to pay $5,000 a year or 1% of their gross annual revenue, whichever was more, to a fund to help victims of sex trafficking, because Renee Unterman contended that strip clubs were a hub for sex trafficking, which is not only an emotional and false statement, but apparently inflammatory as well, and led to the lawsuit because they claimed that this law was basically not only targeting them, but putting I don't want to say like putting them in a bad light, because people either have an opinion about strip clubs or they don't, but they were saying that the legislature by default told everyone that sex trafficking happens at strip clubs when it doesn't. So they sued, they won. It took 3 years, which is remarkable and alarming, but it's a huge victory. I'm so excited. I'm so happy. We're going to talk about it next week on the show a little bit in more in depth and after we look at the order. But I am overjoyed because my name is on Google as being associated with the searched word strippers and strip clubs in Georgia. And for that, I deserve this victory. So
make it hail, baby. And remember, it is your patriotic duty, once this COVID-19 has blown over, to go down and take care of those poor women who can't afford clothing $1 at a time. I think your win covers it for my closing thought too. That is outstanding, and one more for freedom. So, for Jessica Szilagyi, for our guest, for our editor Eric, I'm Dave Roberts. Have a great week.